So welcome out for tonight's program. I thought it's a beautiful day. It was just a holiday weekend. We might not have that many people turn up, and I think we're almost out of chairs. So thank you for coming out for tonight's program. We're all looking forward to it. It should be marvelous. And really, it was so loud of you. Are there any folks here for the first time? Great. Great. Good to see you all. And we're a friendly group, so come and say hi to us after the program. I'm gonna basically just welcome you and let Cecilia give you a couple of announcements. She's a board member and Audubon Adventures coordinator, so she's gonna give you a couple of announcements, and then Dennis will introduce the program.
Thanks, Mara. This is more people than we usually have.
That's the Zoom microphone.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. Yeah, first I wanted to announce our new name, because some people are still asking. It's Coast to Cascades Bird Alliance. That was the winner of our votes. So, probably some of you voted for it, hopefully. So we're working on getting a new logo, and, there's lots of little things to change, but that's our new name. So we'll also be doing business as Lane Audubon. So, it's still a viable alternative, but we're happy to have a new name. And we are very small, all volunteer. Yay, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm happy. We're an all volunteer organization and we really need help. So on June 7th, we're having a volunteer open house. I think it's in the other room, but it's in this building. June 7th, which is a Saturday from 11 to 1. There's gonna be raffle prizes, free native plants, and different people, like I run the education section, people who run conservation, social media. We're gonna be there to talk with you about how maybe you could help, just a couple hours, even various kinds of skills. So we really hope you come. There's some more of these in the back. I didn't make enough. If you want to take a picture, that would be great, or look on our website or take it. All right. Thank you.
First of all, I want to tell you about what's coming up. We're not going to have any meetings during the summer. So our first meeting will be in September. I think it's the 23rd of September. And we're going to have one of our own board members is going to be the speaker, but the idea is that it's going to be about Habitat Haven. You've heard about that. It's this idea of making your yard into a habitat haven, a place that's enjoyable for birds and pollinators and all this kind of things, and native plants. And I'm not a habitat haven place myself, but I have really gotten into native plants, and I went out to Doak Creek Nursery and bought a whole bunch of stuff, and I've got amazing things growing, and it's just been real exciting. So we're going to have Barbara Bryson. She's a board member, and she's going to speak to us about that whole thing and how it all works and how you could get involved. And even if you don't want to get directly involved with Habitat Haven itself, you'll learn a whole lot about native plants and how to turn your yard into a place that's, first of all, easier to maintain because these are native plants, and is going to be very attractive to birds and butterflies and all sorts of things. So that'll be in September. So look forward to that. And we also have some great speakers coming up after that. If you remember, Forrest Tomlinson did an amazing program for us at the, last September. He's coming back. And then Magnus Persmark is also going to do another program for us. These are what I call adventure birding trips, where they take us to wild places and show us amazing pictures of amazing birds. And so anyway, that's all coming up in the fall. So tonight we have Steve Shunk, who is the North American woodpecker expert. He wrote the book. He's got the Peterson Guide to Woodpeckers of North America. He knows all about them. If you've ever had a question about woodpeckers, this is the time to ask. He'll be able to give you answers. And if he can't, I don't know who else could. So get ready for those. He lives in Mexico now. He lives south of Puerto Vallarta, and he leads birding tours there. And he also leads birding tours in the United States. He's been to Eastern Texas just recently. And he also leads the Woodpecker Festival in Sisters every year. And that's why he's back here. He comes back here for that festival. And then I try to find out if he's got a day off where he can come down and talk to us. And so I grab him and I say, Steve, you got it. And he did. And he's here. And we're real excited to have him. So let's give him a nice warm welcome.
Thanks, Dennis. Thank you all for coming tonight. I usually just narrate my slideshows as I go through them, and I know what I'm going to talk about, so I just improvise. Tonight I have to do some reading for you, but it's kind of a special reading. And I'm going to talk about sort of the interface of woodpeckers and humans. And a lot of it's about folklore, and then I'll get into some other things, but I've got to read these stories. And what I'm reading is a cut chapter from my woodpecker book. So this whole chapter about folklore did not make it into the book. So you're maybe the first audience to hear this. So actually it's unedited because it just got cut before it even got edited. So I'm kind of winging it. So bear with me. Okay. So let's see how we're doing here. All right. So let's go back to that last slide. So I have my own company, Paradise Birding, and have led tours for 27 years through Paradise Birding. I lived in Sisters for that period in Central Oregon, and only recently have moved to Mexico, fell in love with a Mexican woman, and you know how that goes. And I'll tell you in a second. Hi, Betty and Jim. How are you guys? They've been there. So I do most of my guiding now through naturalist journeys, and I have several trips coming up. I think we have space left, like one space left on the Borneo trip this fall. And there's still plenty of time for you to get good plane tickets, and you really should come. It's a great show. Borneo is amazing. And then I have a series of trips to Rancho Primavera. So I'm going to talk to you a little first tonight about Rancho Primavera in this place where I live. So I live on this 200-acre ranch called Rancho Primavera. It's a guest ranch and bird sanctuary, and it's located right. Ooh, I got to get used to this new kind of pointer. Right there. Okay. Sorry, that was an improvised video too. We're just about 90 minutes south of Puerto Vallarta, and this area here is called Cabo Corrientes, and I'll show you another map of Cabo Corrientes in a minute. And the ranch is really beautiful, and it's got really diverse habitats. There are open meadows and pastures and jungle and trails, probably 8 miles of trails on the property, big ponds. And it's loaded with West Mexican endemic birds. There are about 20 species of West Mexican endemics, and most of them occur right on the property. So the signature bird for the property is the black-throated magpie jay. And we have yellow-winged cacique, which is another endemic in our backyard, eating our papayas. The Mexican hermit coming to our feeders. Russet-crowned motmot. And the citrulline trogon. All of those are West Mexican endemics. Another star of the show is the blue mockingbird. This guy comes to the feeders every day.
Oh.
And of course, we have woodpeckers and the endemic golden-cheeked woodpecker, as well as the gray-crowned woodpecker. And this slide is not the wrong direction. The bird is upside down.
Oh, I know.
And then we have a couple of big woodpeckers, the lineated, which is a relative of the pileated, and this big pale-billed woodpecker. And all of this stuff I just showed you is quite common on the property. And it's about more than just birds. We've got lots of butterflies,
Okay.
the Montezuma cattle hart, the
That's not in there.
black
It
patch
might be in
blue
the
mark,
garbage.
the
Just
giant
for-
white morpho, which is endemic to Mexico,
You don't know.
red border pixie, and a fire tip. Lots of other critters, including the giant Mexican tree frog. That guy's almost as big as my fist. Pretty amazing frog. And this is Cabo Corrientes. So we have tons of birding on the ranch, but we also go all over this region. There are rivers, as you can see, crisscrossing through the area, and all of these red areas are birding spots. And the birding is really diverse. And when you start over here on the right, where you can see it says, oh, I got my fancy thing here. Ooh, here, up in this area, you go from pine oak forest down through the mixed, what we call semi-deciduous tropical forest, and down here to the thorn forest on the coast. Up in the mountains, we're at the southern end of the Sierra Madre, where the Sierra Madre kind of transition into the central volcanic belt, where we can see birds like tufted flycatcher. And then down at the coast, we take you to see the orange-breasted bunting. No color enhancement on that photo. Our little town nearby is just 10 minutes from the ranch is El Tuito. This is a 16th century pueblo, very quiet, very small town, 3,000 people, with lots of great authentic Mexican food, lots of fresh seafood. We're just an hour from the coast, so we get lots of fresh seafood and then lots of real Mexican food. It's really great. We've got lots of accommodations on the ranch. We've got some cabins as well as rooms for groups. So as you saw, we have some tour groups coming from Naturalist Journeys, but you can also come as an independent traveler. We've got lots of places to stay on the property and lots of things to just show you, okay? So you can go to my website, paradisebirding.com, to learn more about Rancho Primavera. Okay? Tonight, we're going to talk about woodpeckers and humans. A little folklore, a little history, and a little science. It's not a long slideshow, but I am going to do some reading, okay? So let's do it. A long time ago in a land far, far away, Picus of Laurentum, the son of Saturn, once ruled over Ausonia. As the handsomest of warriors and kings, Picus stole the hearts of maidens across the land. But his heart belonged to only one woman, daughter to Vanilia and Janus. The nymph Canaans possessed a beauty beyond words and a voice that could pacify torrid seas and tame the wildest beasts of the woods. One fair day, under the spell of his beloved song, Picus set forth across the fields of Laurentum with his team of horses and men in search of a wild boar. Unbeknownst to Picus, a sorceress was about. Sol's daughter, Circe, had ventured out to collect fresh herbs for her potions. At once, Circe laid eyes on his majesty's striking form. Overcome with iniquitous passion, she flamed to have Picus as her own. Picus and his squires soon bolted across the forest faster than Circe could muster. Determined in her fire, she conjured a phantom boar and commanded it across Picus's path and into the densest of thickets, where he and his team would be forced to dismount. Circe's curses darkened the sky and enshrouded the searchers in fog, culling out Picus from the shield of his protectors. Oh, by those eyes that have captured mine and that beauty, most handsome of youths, that has made this goddess suppliant to you, think of my passion and accept my father, the sun, who sees all things as your own, Circe implored, but Picus was unfazed. Whomever you may be, I am not for you, Picus cried. Another has captured my love and holds me forever. I will not weaken the bond of our affections by drifting astray with another. After repeated, unrequited appeals, Circe lamented, "You will not go unpunished. You will not return to Canaan's, and you will bear the wrath of a wounded woman, a lover, and I am that woman. With incantations to the east and the west, Circe waved her wand and cast a spell on Picus. He ran through the woods, but soon found himself flying with the wings at his arms. He angrily pounded his head, destroying the oak trees with his strangely formidable bill. His crown took the color of his crimson cloak. His golden brooch became that of his chest feathers, and his neck was enshrouded by greenish gold. And nothing remained of the former king except that which he was given by Saturn, his name, Picus. And the story of Picus carried on through the centuries. This painting was in about 1655, sold for $62,000 at Sotheby's auction. And into the 1800s, this is a famous tapestry, and you can actually go find these online and have one for yourself. So the words at the top and the bottom read, I once a king and chief, now am the tree bark's thief, ever twixt trunk and leaf, chasing the prey. And this is the type species for the woodpecker family, and this is the woodpecker that into which Circe turned Picus. So his name lives on today. So the word Picus in Latin means woodpecker. I'm just going to stop for a second. Is there any way to get that panel off the side? Do you know that, Dennis? All right.
Minimize it. The other side. There.
All right. I'm kind of a Zoom novice myself. I hated Zoom. I mean, I love Zoom. For those of you who can't make it, that's wonderful. But I didn't like it when that was the only choice, right? Just not my style. Anyway, okay. So the legacy of Picus remains today. Linnaeus in 1748 coined the order name Pisci and the genus Picus. Today, the order name is the Pisciformes and includes all of these families here. The suborder, now some of these taxonomic levels you might not be familiar with, and some people probably don't even recognize these taxonomic levels, but the suborder Pisci was the name adopted from Linnaeus's order name, includes the barbets, toucans, honeyguides, and the Piscidae. The Piscidae infraorder includes the honeyguides and the Piscidae family. The Piscidae family includes wrynecks, piculets, and the Piscinae subfamily. And those are the true woodpeckers. So the woodpeckers we think of as woodpeckers, okay, those are the Piscinae. And all these names came from the story of Picus. There are 12 genera in North America, or in the world, that include some form of Picus's name, including Picoides and Sphaeropicus in North America. Okay, a few more stories. Let's see. The woodpecker, like so many other creatures, held special meaning among ancient civilizations. In Greece, the woodpecker was often depicted as an oracle, sought for the prediction of weather and other events. One Greek story compared the woodpecker to the devil. The woodpecker would tap on a tree, and if the tree were healthy, the woodpecker would fly away. But if it were rotten or diseased, he would stay and excavate, just as the devil would prey on the weak but shy away from the strong. Christian tradition also associated the woodpecker with Satan, who weakens the human soul, just as the woodpecker was seen to weaken trees by its excavations. Many cultures associated the woodpecker with creation as it brought forth its young from the innermost life-giving core of the tree. For its ability to find food hidden under the bark of trees, then deliver it to its young in the tree's sacred heart, the woodpecker was also seen as a finder of treasures and a bringer of gifts. The woodpecker's drumming was seen as a magical iteration of thunder and foretold of rain, with the ability to save animals and crops. Woodpeckers were even believed to have taught the skill of drumming to humans, evidenced by the human use of a hollowed-out log as a drum that was pounded in rituals to summon rain. Another fun story regards the founding of Rome, and you may be familiar with the she-wolf that that helped raise Romulus and Remus, but you don't know the whole story. I'm not going to go through the whole story because it's a long story, but Romulus and Remus were born and they're taken away from their mother, and they were put in the river by a servant. They were supposed to be killed, but the servant felt bad, and so he put them in a river in a basket. They floated down the river, and they got stuck in some trees on the bank, and along came the she-wolf to rescue them. But they're also, if you look up right here, there was a woodpecker. And the woodpecker fed Romulus and Remus as they grew up and before they were rediscovered by a farming couple and raised as their children. And there's a little more graphic representation there. He's feeding him a fig because they got stuck in a fig tree. Their basket got caught in a fig tree on the shoreline. A Norse folk tale tells of Christ and St. Peter visiting a cottage where they encountered a woman named Gertrude who was baking while wearing a red cap. They asked for some food. She agreed and proceeded to make the biggest and best loaf of bread she had ever baked. But she was not willing to share her best loaf ever. She made another and another, making each loaf smaller than the last, but each turned out too large and gorgeous to give away. Because of Gertrude's lack of generosity, Christ transformed her into a woodpecker. She escaped through the chimney, but was condemned to seek food from the crevices of the trees for the rest of her life. Thus, Europe's black woodpecker got its charcoal color, but retained its red cap. Pretty good. There's a lot of Native American history with woodpeckers. This is an artifact that was uncovered from 16th century. Woodpecker legends of the Native Americans have permeated their societies from pre-settlement times until today. Northern California tribes such as the Tolowa, the Karok, Yurok, and Hoopa considered pileated woodpecker top knots to be high-value currency. And possession of headbands made from red-breasted sapsucker scalps positioned one in high esteem. Alaskan natives called the three-toed woodpecker Tekelklala and told of an old legend where in the time of famine, the male three-toed devoured his mate and wiped his claws clean on the back of his head, evidenced by the yellow mark of fat on the crown. Pawnee legend held that the woodpecker once won a debate with the turkey about which should be the protector of all people. Although the turkey laid the largest clutch, the woodpecker was more cautious, keeping its young protected inside the tree and teaching them to live to older ages than the turkey. Some tribes consider the woodpecker the original canoe maker, and Mohawks forecast weather based partly on the woodpecker's behaviors. In many native cultures, the woodpecker is connected to the heartbeat of the earth itself, and drumming has many mystical connotations, including as the catalyst for shape-shifting abilities. It was said that shamans could ride woodpecker drum beats into other dimensions. One tale of the relationship between the woodpeckers and a sugar maple. Long ago, a sugar maple suffered from intense itching caused by grubs and beetles. Unable to scratch itself, the tree called out for help. But the woodland creatures could do nothing. Then the woodpeckers arrived and picked every pest from the sugar maple's bark. Years later, during a serious drought, the woodpeckers were dying from thirst. The sugar maple remembered the help he had received from the woodpeckers. He told them to come to his trunk and drill some holes, and that they would fill with sap. The woodpeckers did, and they were able to slow down their thirst and survive the drought. And this is a nice, old photo from the 1800s of a hoopa woodpecker dance. And I've seen woodpecker cachinas from New Mexico. Is that where cachinas are from? Hopis. They use their, as shown in this picture here, they use the woodpecker feathers and other body parts in ritual dress and symbolism. Panamint Shoshone Indians of the Mojave Desert used flicker, tail, and wing feathers alone or in combination with yucca root in basket weaving. Among the Creek, Seminole, and Cherokee tribes, woodpecker scalps were associated with warfare. A flicker feather on a prayer stick usually reflected war against some enemy, physical or spiritual. When flicker feathers were worn in the hair, it indicated the individual was a member of the medicine society. The Zuni Pueblo Indians were known to use feathers of flicker and Lewis's downy and hairy woodpeckers in blankets, clothing, fetishes, ceremonial headdresses, quivers, and masks. Chumash Indians used flicker feathers extensively in dress, woven into mesh skirts and ceremonial headbands. Long bands were worn down the back or used as banners at ceremonial sites ceremonial sites made extensively with flicker feathers. One 66-centimeter band had 412 flicker feathers, comprising the wing and tail feathers from at least 14 individual birds. Crest feathers were highly valued by the Hoopa Indians, and the Omahas used feathers to decorate pipes. Headdresses of woodpecker scalps were worn by Klamath and Shasta shamans, and in California they were donned by dancers participating in Yurok and Hopi jumping dances. Lakota flutes often resembled woodpeckers because the red-headed woodpecker taught a poor young hunter how to make and use the flute to win the hand of the chief's beautiful daughter. One of the most spectacular pieces of indigenous ivory-billed woodpecker art comes from Key Marco in southern Florida. Frank Hamilton Cushing uncovered a wooden plank during an excavation in the late 1800s on which was painted an intricate effigy of the ivory-bill. All right. So we move from the legend and myth to the early naturalists. So back in the 1700s, well, obviously before that, settlers started coming, but the naturalists really, when they started recording their findings and reporting those findings, started with John Lawson when he came and wrote this book called A Voyage to Carolina, containing the exact description and natural history of that country, together with the present state thereof, in a journal of 1,000 miles, traveled through several nations of Indians, giving a particular account of their customs, manners, etc. We don't write titles like that anymore. Anyway, John Lawson was the first one to describe a few species of North American woodpeckers. The names that he gave them didn't stick, but he was the first one to have published something written about North American woodpeckers. Mark Catesby was then here later, and Catesby did some drawings, including the largest white-billed woodpecker, and he gave them these Latin names, Picus maximus rostro albo. Another one, the larger red-crested woodpecker. which of course is the pileated. You guys got this one right. Ivory-billed woodpecker. And the pileated. Then, of course, there was Linnaeus. And Linnaeus described 8 species of woodpeckers, which were the 8 most common eastern species. So as the settlers came in, most of the collecting was done in the east until later the Western naturalists that came to explore the West, especially for the railroads, came out here and started collecting some of the Western woodpeckers. In France, Alfred Malherbe wrote the very first book on woodpeckers, The Woodpeckers of the World. He also named a few subspecies of woodpeckers and did some artwork himself, also including the ivory-billed woodpecker there on the left and sapsucker and red-cockaded woodpecker on the right. Let's see. The first visitors to North American continent frequently reported on woodpecker encounters in their journals. So early on Captain Cook's third voyage in 1778, William Webb Ellis painted the red-shafted flicker and the Alaskan three-toed woodpecker from descriptions dictated by William Anderson as Anderson held the birds in his hand. Pileated woodpecker and northern flicker were among the species collected by Captain Albert Hastings Markham near Esquimalt, Canada in the early 1880s. Woodpeckers were often available at food markets and eaten like any other game bird. In Thomas DeVoe's mid-1800s summary of every article of human food sold in the public markets of New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn, he explained that the red-headed woodpecker was not a common bird, but often killed in New York and is quite as good eating as the golden-winged woodpecker, but smaller. Lewis and Clark made major contributions to the natural history of the New West, not the least of which was collecting the holotype for the Lewis's woodpecker. In September 1805, Lewis first referred to a black species of woodpecker as common in north-central Idaho. On the return trip eastward in May 1806, his team first collected specimens of what he called the black woodpecker. He compared it to the size of the lark woodpecker, which we refer to as the flicker. And he likened its flight style and call note to that of the small red-headed woodpecker common to the Atlantic states. This photo on the right is the actual specimen of Lewis's woodpecker that Meriwether Lewis brought back with him and gave to Alexander Wilson at the Peel Museum in Philadelphia. And it is still in the Museum of Comparative Zoology in Harvard. And it is the last remaining intact specimen of the Lewis and Clark expedition. So it's outlasted all the other animals and plants that they brought back with them. I've held it in the box. It's in a special box. You're not allowed to touch it, of course, but great experience. And regarding Wilson, he, of course, wrote his own American Ornithology book. He is often referred to as the father of modern ornithology or father of American ornithology. And he did some drawings. So he drew this Lewis's woodpecker that Meriwether Lewis brought to him. Wilson was not known for being the most realistic artist. Nonetheless, his drawings were somewhat realistic, and it just wasn't as famous as some of the later artists. Which of course include the gentleman who said this: "It is generally agreeable to be in the company of individuals who are naturally animated and pleasant. For this reason, nothing can be more gratifying than the society of woodpeckers in the forest." John James Audubon. Of course, Audubon's drawings were a little bit more realistic, and he drew them, he called it drawing from life. So he would draw them depicted in behaviors that he'd observed, and included habitat elements that weren't included by the earlier artists. Woodpeckers even appeared in the marketing materials designed to draw settlers to the New West. The Nelson's Pictorial Guidebook to the Yosemite Valley gave one of the earliest accounts of the acorn woodpecker. Instead of the eastern woodpecker tapping at the hollow beech tree, the red-headed Californian species, L. carpintero, the carpenter woodpecker, is hard at work boring holes in the bark of a large pine tree and afterwards carefully plugging them up with acorns, or examining them with a critical eye to see if his toil does credit to his taste. And even in the ornithological journals of the time, woodpeckers made some interesting news. The Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry in Hawaii wanted to get his hands on some woodpeckers. So this article was published in the Condor, famous ornithological journal, in 1901. And he wanted to get, 100 or 200 downy woodpeckers to introduce into Hawaii. So you wonder how all those birds, some of you been to Hawaii? Yeah, you wonder how all those introduced birds got there. Well, they went out and bought them by the hundreds. And I don't know if it's good or not, but the downy woodpeckers never made it to Hawaii. So what is it about woodpeckers? They definitely capture our attention. And they're probably best known for this behavior of hammering their heads into trees. And so in modern science, we've started to learn a lot about woodpeckers that has led to many discoveries. In the meantime, we also have this problem of woodpeckers drilling into our homes. Anybody ever had that problem? Okay. We can talk about that later if you want. Basically, we've taken snags out of the landscape. And so woodpeckers are looking for places to excavate. The flicker is the biggest culprit of this. As a weak excavator, the flicker likes to excavate in things that are easy. And so the flicker comes to your house and taps on the wood and says, "Oh, that's easy." And so it chops right through that wood and it looks in there and says, "Oh, that's not good." And it moves over 3 feet and it does it again. And some people try to patch up those little holes. But when you're living in a forest and there are lots of woodpeckers, these were actually made by a white-headed woodpecker. It seems like it's just never-ending task. Woodpeckers back in the early 1900s were also cursed in the Southeast, especially the yellow-bellied sapsucker, for damaging the wood of trees. They would have ornamental trees there, and by making sap rings around the trees, it wounded the trees and made them imperfect. So these are examples of a tree that has healed up the scars around it from the sapsuckers. And you can see if this had been an ornamental tree that was planted, they would be branded as a curse to those trees. Woodpeckers, of course, also get a bad reputation for drumming on your house. Again, we've removed snags from the landscape. That's what they used to drum on, right? Before we put other loud substrates into the environment. This sapsucker's been drumming on this cap to this light post, and he's worn the paint off. So they're gonna find the loudest thing that they can to do their drumming. And if you've provided a nice resonant surface for them, they're going to use it. you can try to develop alternatives. And again, if you want to ask me about that later, we can talk about it. Going more into the science on the positive end, we've learned a lot about anatomy by studying woodpeckers. And we have this digital morphology project at the University of Texas at Austin that is basically a CT scan that gets into woodpeckers, into anything. They can scan rocks even and get slices of images, sliced images through at any angle through whatever they're scanning. And this helped us understand more about the woodpecker's bone structure here in the frontal bone and the occipital bone, as well as how the hyoid bone, the tongue part of the bone, wraps around the skull. We also have made safer football and motorcycle helmets by studying woodpeckers. And even electronics have been improved by studying woodpeckers. And this case was built for electronic components and as a shock absorber through studying woodpecker anatomy. This is Dr. Ivan Schwab. He's an ophthalmologist from the University of California, Davis, and he won an Ig Nobel Award. You may be familiar with the Ig Nobel Awards. They're from the Annals of Improbable Science, I think it's called. And these are awards that are kind of what are seen sometimes as kind of silly scientific discoveries, but they're not silly at all, actually. They're just creative. And he was able to show why woodpeckers don't get retinal hemorrhages. So he's studying the retina and he wants to learn how to protect the human retina. So why not study an organism that slams its head at a deceleration of 1200 Gs and doesn't damage its eyes or its retinas? So he won an Ig Nobel Prize for that. And science sometimes is elusive. The ivory-billed woodpecker, unfortunately, never had a lot of science dedicated to it. There was only one study ever done on the ivory-billed woodpecker, and that was after they were almost gone. But there's still science coming out. There are still scientists publishing papers on the ivory-billed woodpecker, many of whom say that they still exist. Whether or not they still exist is obviously a subject of debate, but it still brings woodpeckers into the lives of humans across the spectrum. How many people heard about the ivory-billed woodpecker through the news? National news, right? National news. It even got international attention. And so this kind of thing, the way a woodpecker can enter the lives of humans is a special thing. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer some questions. I think we have some time.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say.
Does anybody have any questions over here?
So I have some woodpeckers in my yard.
Yeah.
And when I put on Merlin, the audio part, it will identify, for example, a hairy woodpecker just by hearing it go. Peck, 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 peck. Is there, can you identify woodpeckers just by the frequency of their pecking? Or I mean, what's the science there?
Well, there's two different kinds of pecking. There's feeding sounds and drumming. Drumming is the repetitive sound that you hear that goes brrr, like that. Okay, drums are the woodpecker's equivalent of a song. So just like you can identify a warbler by its song, a woodpecker can be identified by its drum. Now, some woodpeckers are difficult to tell apart. We were just talking about that tonight. And for example, the hairy and the flicker are not so easy to tell apart. That takes a lot of practice. The downy, a little bit easier. On the east slope of the Cascades, it takes practice to be able to pick out a white-headed, but the blackback and three-toed are easier. So some species are easier to identify than others, but the drumming is what Merlin is picking out. Merlin would not be able to identify woodpeckers by their feeding sounds, which tend to be more erratic, something like that, or a sapsucker, which tends to go. So
Here, let me turn on Merlin.
so those are the kind of things that, if you learn more about woodpeckers, I didn't really try to sell my book tonight, partly because it's out of print. But you can go online and get it in Kindle for like $3. Okay, Peterson Reference Guide to Woodpeckers. You really should have it. At $3, I mean, come on, right? I think I get like 40 cents of that. So that would be a big, if 100 of you did it, I'd be chipping away at my advance. Anyway, what was I talking about? So anyway, back to your question, yes, they can be told apart, but the feeding sounds take practice to be able to say like, okay, I know you could learn about the woodpeckers. Oh, that's what I was going to say. You could learn about the woodpeckers and their feeding behaviors, and that would help you learn the feeding sounds. So a white-headed woodpecker is hard to hear when it's feeding because it's probing and gleaning, right? Whereas the hairy's hammering and the blackback is hammering when they're feeding. So you can tell the difference when you hear them feeding. And again, that sapsucker sound feeding, kind of like a sewing machine, that's a pretty distinctive sound. Another question. Back here, you in the yellow shirt.
They survived their lack of retinal detachment.
Have I done the anatomy talk?
Last year.
I
but-
did?
But
The whole full-on anatomy talk?
well, probably not.
I don't think so.
But I think that it would be helpful if you'd repeat the question because the people on Zoom don't
Oh,
hear,
okay, great.
don't hear the audience.
So the question there was, what is it that helps woodpeckers prevent retinal detachments? I'm just going to tell you the eye part because the whole anatomy thing that protects the soft tissues of the head from damage is a phenomenal suite of adaptations, something you would never imagine. So here's the deal with the eye. Woodpeckers have these two organs in their eyes, one of which most organisms have, called the choroid. And that's kind of surrounds the back of the eye. There's another one that woodpeckers have called the pecten, okay, P-E-C-T-E-N. In a woodpecker, the pecten and the choroid fill with blood and a mucopolysaccharide fluid the instant before the woodpecker contacts the surface. By those two organs filling with blood and fluid increases the intraocular pressure of the eye, preventing the eye from pulling away from the back and damaging the retina. That's what Dr. Schwab discovered. That's a pretty dang cool discovery. I mean, he should have gotten a better award for that. It must have something to do with the motion of the head going forward. And when the woodpecker's excavating, doing its harder drumming, it knows what it's about to do. And so it's just a signal that goes to the brain that says you're about to have this potential for damage, so you better protect yourself. So somehow there's an involuntary reaction that the woodpecker's body is used to performing. I'm not an anatomy specialist, but that's my best explanation. Another question. There was one more over here somewhere. Oh, okay. Yeah, here.
I know residents, besides other tree trunks, are there other options or good things for them to drum on?
Yeah, let's talk about two different things. One is excavations and one is drumming. Excavations, again, the main culprit of excavating in a home or a building is the flicker. Other woodpeckers will do it, but flickers are so ubiquitous and they're weak excavators. So they're going to go for the easiest thing they can find to excavate. Flickers also happen to be the one woodpecker species that's most likely to take to a nest box. So if you put in, and you can buy a flicker nest box at the wild bird store, or you can go online and easily, if you like to do that kind of thing, build your own. The plans are available online to build a flicker nest box. And then you just put the nest box on a tree near the house, and you'd be really surprised how quickly that flicker is going to take to that box.
Is there a difference between a wood duck box and a flicker box?
Yeah, kind of. A wood duck box tends to have an oval shaped entrance, a flat oval shaped entrance. A flicker box is going to tend to have a round entrance. And a wood duck box is not generally as big as a flicker box, which is kind of interesting because wood ducks are bigger, but I can't really explain why that is.
It's wood duck box that some flickers moved into.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, flickers are opportunists,
Yeah.
right? You're a weak excavator, you're going to take what you can find. Okay, hold on 1 second. Back to the drumming thing. Okay, the best solution I've ever been able to come up with for deterring drumming is to make something louder away from your house. So my idea, and I haven't tested this, but is to put sheet metal around a tree so that the woodpecker can perch below it and drum on the sheet metal. That's just a suggestion. The only other alternative is to recruit or retain snags. So recruiting snags is a weird concept, but that means killing trees. So, a healthy forest has dead trees. We just have to change the way we think about our forests.
Drain pipes and gutters.
Well, when they're drumming, it's for communication that is either courtship or territorial behavior. Most of these types of behaviors for woodpeckers are the same for territoriality and courtship. If there's another bird of the same sex nearby, it's going to be considered territorial behavior. If there's a bird of the opposite sex nearby, it's going to be considered courtship behavior. And there are cases when it could be both. But it's basically a declaration, just like any bird singing, to say, this is my territory, or I'm beautiful, come mate with me. Yeah, you can rest assured that it's only going to happen from March through June, and then they'll stop. Yeah, it's just a breeding season thing. They don't. Right. Yeah, I know, at 5 o'clock. We took out the snags. It's our fault. It's not their fault. Don't blame them. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, when I was out walking, I saw, at first I thought it was a hawk, but it's actually a female flicker, and she was so swollen. Her abdomen, or she seemed to be swollen. So how much do they actually swell when they're about to lay their clutch of eggs? They have to be incredibly rounded.
When was this?
Sunday.
What was the weather like?
Okay, so the question,
Oh yeah, sorry. The question was, sorry, thank you. The question was, a flicker was observed being puffed up and she looked swollen. My understanding of the anatomy is that having an egg in your oviduct is not going to cause you to swell. That if you see a bird puffed up like that, it's often a heat retention thing. And woodpeckers don't have any down feathers. So when it's cold, they will kind of puff up their their contour feathers in a way that might make them look bigger. That's my only suggestion for what you might have seen. They also, when they're preening, they're going to be puffed up. So I don't know if you observe preening or not, maybe not, but sometimes they'll sit there puffed up after they're done preening. They might also be trying to remove feather mites, be puffed up for doing that. I'm not sure. Anybody else? Yes? You are lucky.
Now, last year, we're certain that one was the adolescent, because
red crown was all messy and he was
Smaller.
he's smaller. So is there a way to tell male from female on the pileated or young from old? Are they the Jim, what we try to perceive?
Okay, the question is, how do we tell male from female pileateds and adults from juveniles? Pileated woodpeckers are what we call sexually dichromatic, which means there are differences in the plumages between the sexes. The female has a black forehead, and then the crest is red in the back. She also lacks the red mustache of the male. Now, the red mustache of the male is not as bold as the red mustache on a flicker, in part because that red mustache has black bases to the feathers, right? The female's got a black stripe here. The male's red comprises feathers that are black at the base and red at the tips, right? So it's not as bold as a flicker's red stripe. So it is hard to see sometimes unless you have really good light. Juvenile pileatids, until they go through their what's called a preformative molt or their first major molt in the fall, will have pale red. All their red parts are going to be super pale, almost pink. Okay, and they also will have a little smaller bill. It should be a noticeably smaller bill. But like most birds, they're going to usually be full size from beak to tail in general. Even though their bill's a little shorter, they're still going to be pretty big. And that's kind of the case for most woodpeckers. Young woodpeckers are going to be paler, duller than their parents. And most woodpeckers in the world are sexually dichromatic, even though it's subtle. Like Downies and Harrys, we're aware, have a little red patch that's pretty easy to see, right? And that, again, is a red patch that's against white feathers, not dark feathers. Yes.
What's the difference between a male and female red-breasted sapsucker?
Good question. Dennis brought that up earlier. So there are about 200 woodpecker species in the world, okay? 4 woodpecker species, 4 only, are sexually monochromatic, which means what? The same. One of those is the red-breasted sapsucker, okay? So there are some subtle differences that can only really be told if you have the bird in your hand. But in general, we consider red-breasted sapsuckers to be sexually monochromatic. There are 2 more that are North American. Anybody know which ones they are? One's Western and one's Eastern, and they're close cousins. Let's take a guess. Red-headed is correct, and you're also correct that acorn is a close relative of the red-headed. What's the other one that's this relative of those 2? Lewis, yep. Lewis's woodpecker. So the Lewis, the red-headed, and the red-breasted sapsucker are 3 of the 4 monochromatic woodpeckers in the world, all in North America. The 4th one, and I doubt any of you know the 4th one because it's an island endemic in the Caribbean. Does that help? No. Guadeloupe woodpecker on the French Guadeloupe Island out in the Lesser Antilles. So, yeah, you could, try to wonder why that happened the way it did, but yes.
And it was underneath the branch, hanging underneath the branch, doing excavate. I was trying to figure out how it managed to brace itself and not fall off. Because I've never seen a woodpecker completely horizontal and hanging onto the branch above it.
Upside down. Okay, the question was, how can a pileated woodpecker, a massive woodpecker, it's massive. Well, maybe you wouldn't call it massive. It's one of the biggest woodpeckers in the world. Let's just put it that way, okay? It's like one of the top 10 biggest. How does a big woodpecker like that hang upside down? The woodpecker, part of the anatomy story has to do with this amazing structure at the base of the spine called the pygostyle. Okay, the pygostyle is large in woodpeckers, and it's larger in the ones that do the heavier excavating. And the pygostyle has specialized muscles that control the tail. The tail is a critical element of a woodpecker's ability to perch in a tree, especially upside down. The feet of a woodpecker are super specialized and they can move their toes around. Okay? They're not really zygodactyl like you've been told all these years. Zygodactyl, there are a few woodpeckers that have the traditional zygodactyl foot, which is 2 toes forward and 2 back. Okay, but that's a perching adaptation, 2 forward and 2 back. That doesn't really help you climb. You don't want these toes down here when you're climbing, right? So on woodpeckers, they are what we call ectropodactyl, and that 3rd toe swings around like this. So it's called outer movable toe. So you often have 3 toes like this to climb. When you're a pileated woodpecker, you're big enough that you can wrap your legs around a branch if it's a relatively small branch, and those giant toes are going to hold you onto that tree. The claws are extremely sharp, and they go in at a 90-degree angle, which increases their ability to be able to hold fast on the branch. So the yeah,
Well enough, but, with the toe and the floor together.
yeah, they can basically hug the branch. So that happens with pileatids and the other big giant woodpeckers. They typically will basically put their arms around a branch to be able to hold themselves up on a smaller substrate. Obviously, they can climb bigger stuff too. But I have lots of pictures of that pale-billed woodpecker that you saw in that one photo underneath a branch doing just that, basically hugging a smaller branch because they're big woodpeckers. Even on a relatively big branch that's 5 inches or more, they still have to reach around and hold on like this. Yep. Anything else? One more here.
Questions in the chat.
Oh my God. I don't know how to do that. How do we do that? Well, I'll let you figure that out. Dennis doesn't either. What was the question over here?
There's a question over there.
Okay, hold on over here. You go first.
So flickers, I thought anting among flickers. Now, what about other woodpeckers? Do they ant as well?
Your battery's running low.
Well, that's crazy.
Your battery's running low. You might want to plug that in. Okay, anting. Woodpeckers don't do a whole lot of anting. Anting is like when you let ants come onto your body to eat feather mites or body mites. We don't have a lot of records of woodpeckers anting in that way. They will, I've seen some strange behaviors where a woodpecker will reach under a lichen repeatedly and stick its bill under its feathers. And I don't know what that's about. Because you'd have to catch the bird and have a microscope, and I've never read anything about that. And so, I mean, there are some records of woodpeckers anting, but not a lot. They do eat ants, but they don't really like having ants on them that much. The ants they eat are typically underground burrowing ants. And they will go to above ground ants sometimes, and often they'll get ants on them. And they will allow the ants to help, clean them. But I think the association with ants sometimes might make us seem that they're doing it more than they are. They do practice that behavior, and they probably do it more than other woodpeckers. Yeah. And there was one other question over here somewhere. Yeah.
Speak up.
I'll tell you the question. The question was, how does the woodpecker's tongue, what's the woodpecker tongue structure? Oh man, we need to do the anatomy talk. I do a whole presentation on the anatomy. Anyway, the woodpecker has this system called a hyoid apparatus. And it forms an elongated Y, kind of like this. And The straight part of the Y is the part with the fleshy part of the tongue that we might see. Okay. The forked part of the Y goes around the trachea and esophagus in the backbone, comes back around the skull. It's outside the skull. Okay. It's not inside the skull. So it goes around the skull on the outside and comes down, and most woodpeckers' tongues end, hyoids end right above their right eye socket. Okay, and then every time that woodpecker sticks its tongue out, that whole thing kind of unwinds and rewinds. It's very complicated. There's a whole set of bones and muscles. We have a hyoid bone in our throat, but it's just one bone. You probably know about that from Law and Order, right? Because when they get their hyoid bone crushed, they know they've been. That's how I learned about it. Anyway, so we have a hyoid bone. The woodpeckers have a hyoid apparatus. Very complicated, a whole set of muscles. Some of them are for extension, some for retraction, some for wiggling the tip of the tongue. It's amazing. Yes. Are we okay on time, or what's
One more.
one more?
Some weird, crazy stuff going on down there.
Okay. For those of you who are on Zoom, the question was, what is about woodpeckers? I'm trying to blow this up in case somebody on there had a question. What's woodpecker sexuality? Is there something strange about woodpecker sexuality? The only thing that's really strange about woodpecker sexuality is how it's a little, they're kind of clumsy. And so they have kind of an odd posture. When they're mating, copulating, one typically the female typically perches horizontally on a branch in parallel to the branch. The male then will come on top, but then he has to kind of roll over to the side. She has to move her tail, and then they do the cloacal kiss, and then he usually falls off. So it's more of an acrobatic kind of thing. Now, the strangest thing some woodpeckers do, and this is famous, the Lewis and red-headed are the most famous for this, is they practice reverse mounting. Okay, and that may not be what you think it is. What they do is one will mount the other, and then they'll switch. So you can never really tell which one is the mate. And it's curious that those are two of the sexually monochromatic birds. So I'm sure they know which one is which, but somehow evolutionarily, there's some connection. I don't think it's a coincidence that they're both sexually monochromatic and that they practice that behavior. I don't remember reading that about other woodpeckers in North America. Okay, so if you ever sit and watch Lewis's woodpeckers at the right time of year, you'll see this behavior. They'll mount, and then they'll literally just one will hop over and the other one will jump on top. So I don't even know if other birds do that. Some of you might know that, but.
Yeah, great question to end.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for